Hello and welcome. And thank you for taking some time out of your day to join me for a contemplation of a hymn from our 1982 Episcopal hymnal. Before I get into it, and before we try something maybe a little bit different today that I'd like us to engage in, I would like to tell a story. In the beginning of this pandemic, which I don't know about you, but for me, it feels like it was about 1,000 years ago that we went and started this. Our churches here in the Diocese of New Jersey went on lockdown. This simply meant we could not safely use our buildings as there was so much that was still not known about the coronavirus. It certainly did not mean that we were going to stop worshiping God, but it did change the context in some pretty unexpected ways. We were suddenly able to join each other at home through the power of Zoom or Facebook Live. And we were able to continue to pray and to remember, which is exactly what Jesus calls us to do in the services. Now, when we first gathered together again with some of my congregation, I think it was probably about 4 months after the initial lockdown. We started the service as traditional. I walked out and began. And as I was reading the very first prayers, I looked around and I noticed something unusual in that space. And as we continued to move through the ritual, I saw that the folks that were with me were just sitting in the pews, not standing up or kneeling or physically moving in any way. They were simply sitting. Now, when it got to the gospel reading, I had to say something about it. I paused with the book open and looked around at this moment when normally the entire congregation get to their feet as they are able. And when I saw no movement, I said, look, I know we've all gotten used to sitting at home, but, and all of a sudden we all went, "Huh," and got up onto our feet. Now, I chuckled about that at the time, and I'll tell you, I chuckle about it still today. There was really no harm in it. But I wonder, do we often pause to consider the movement of our bodies in prayer and how that can enhance our engagement, or how sometimes our movements or our physical bodies can be a distraction from our time of prayer? I also wonder about movement within the prayers themselves, the verbs that are used during our prayers that make us think about action, activity. As I usually end our time together with a question, how does this hymn motivate you? Or how is God calling you to action through the words of this hymn? I'd like us to try focusing specifically on that today. And so I have chosen another of our Epiphany hymns, Christ, when for us you were baptized. For those of you who want to look it up, it's hymn number 121 in the Episcopal Hymnal 1982. And it was written by Bland Tucker. His full name is Francis Bland Tucker, and he was born in 1895 and received both his master's and his doctorate of divinity at Virginia Theological Seminary. He was served in France during World War I, and then after he was ordained, his ordained ministry took place in Virginia and in Washington, D.C., and then for quite a while down in the state of Georgia. Now, he has stated that he never even thought about writing a hymn until he was named to be on the Joint Commission on Revision of the Hymnal, which was started in 1937 and resulted in the 1940 hymnal. This is just one of the hymns that we have in our current hymnal that was given to us by Bland Tucker. And so it's always fun to flip to the back of the hymnal and look up his name under composers and authors and see what other beloved hymns have been given to us by this extremely talented and gifted man. But for now, let's dive in. So, get comfortable where you're sitting. Take a couple of deep breaths. Close your eyes if it's more comfortable for you. And while you listen to the words, pay attention to those action verbs that occur in the verses. Christ, when for us you were baptized, God's Spirit on you came. As peaceful as a dove, and yet as urgent as a flame. God called you his beloved Son, called you his servant true, sent you his kingdom to proclaim, his holy will to do. Straightway and steadfast until death, you then obeyed his call, freely as Son of Man to serve and give your life for all. Baptize us with your Spirit. Lord, your cross on us be signed, that, likewise, in God's service, we may perfect freedom find. We may perfect freedom find. What did you find? And where did you find yourself in those words? I'm struck by the call of action that is reflecting Jesus's actions and the call that is coming to us to respond. Jesus baptized, heard the call, went where God sent, proclaimed and did God's will, obeying and serving. What strikes me the deepest, though, is that Jesus freely did all of these so that we can find perfect freedom by following where he leads. It's almost like we are presented with the simple summation of Jesus's ministry and then asked to contemplate how that plays out in our own lives. So I'd like to leave you with some questions today. No surprise there. Take some time to reflect on them now, or if you'd like, click on the recording of this hymn found in the comments to enhance that time of reflection. So my first question: how has your baptism had an impact on your life? If you think of it sort of in the opposite way, how different may your life have been thus far if you hadn't allowed the Holy Spirit into your heart? My second question is my all-time favorite. What's God calling you to do? Now, again, as it is one of my favorites, it is also a huge question. It's a big, lifelong question. So for today, let's just narrow it down. Today, at this time, in this place, through these words, what is God calling you to do? It doesn't always have to be a big action. It can be simple as saying a prayer of thanks, calling and checking on a friend, or even God may be calling you to take a nap without feeling any guilt. Finally, how do you proclaim your faith in the everyday? What actions stemming from your baptism and from God's call specifically to you will you come to see as your way of obeying God's will? So there's some good questions for us to all contemplate about. And thank you again for joining me today. And as always, take care and God bless.